How's everyone, Grant here? Welcome back to the channel. And I've had this Redmi Note 9 Pro 5G for just over 3 days now. So I just want to give you a bit of an update, and I really want to focus on battery life and my first impressions on the cameras. But I really wanted to start by looking at this hardware because this is made of all glass. So that's a glass matte finish back there with aluminum sides. And this is $300. Most phones at this price range are plastic. Even the Poco X3 NFC, which is probably the best in class at a little bit cheaper than this, that's plastic. This is all glass, and it's got that really nice matte back finish, so it doesn't pick up or show fingerprints as easily. Comes in 3 different colors. This is obviously that kind of blue to coral sand, pink sand kind of a look, that nice gradient look. It's unique, so that's why I wanted this one. If you want more conventional colors, I think it comes in blue and a black. But that pattern continues to the aluminum sides, you can see there. So that blue to pink sand gradient goes all the way around, just like the back. So very unique color, very nice, and that glass aluminum combination at 300 bucks, that's gonna be tough to beat. I mean, pick up something like this, which is $500, the Pixel 4a 5G. This is plastic, and nothing against the Pixel. I think the Pixel looks great, but it is plastic, and if you felt it, it's not gonna feel as expensive. And I think if I put this phone and this phone in your hands, or most people's hands, I think 9 out of 10 people are going to say that the Redmi feels like the more expensive phone. I think all I'm trying to say here is that for $300, you're getting a lot of phone as far as hardware is concerned. So good job on Xiaomi on providing a lot of bang for the buck as far as the hardware. This thing probably looks at least twice as expensive as it really is. So really nice hardware there on the part of Xiaomi. And you can see that 108 megapixel camera on the back that we'll talk about a little bit later. Next, I just wanted to touch a little bit on the display, even though I did that in the unboxing. So again, 1080p LCD display at 120 hertz. So this should be about 6.6 inches or so. So not the smallest phone, but really nice. And even though it's LCD, I know there's a lot of OLED snobs. I prefer OLED too, but it's nice using an LCD screen from time to time. They get nice and cool as far as the color temperature goes, and you can calibrate that down to be warmer if you like, but I do like that cooler color temperature. Sometimes those OLED screens can get a little bit warm, and this can be a refreshing thing to look at. And it's not the brightest, so indoors I gotta run this at about 70%. Outdoors, visibility is going to be a little bit lower. It's not impossible to see, it's just going to be a little bit dim. So outdoors, it could be a little bit brighter. But overall, you can still see it. It's not that bad. And indoors, more than just fine. Looks really nice. And with that 120 hertz, really fast and fluid, coupled with the Snapdragon 750G processor, and it's running Android 10 with the December security patch and the Xiaomi MIUI 12 skin. So the skin isn't heavy. If you can see there, there's the quick settings panel. It's close to stock-ish. It's not overly heavy. It's got some of Xiaomi's customized features and software on there that doesn't really get in the way. Everything is just fast, fluid, and runs snappy. So as far as software performance, experience has been really good so far. And the only thing to note is that if you're in the US, I wouldn't recommend this phone. This was launched in China, so it's not going to have the US LTE or 5G bands, except for maybe band 5 for AT&T, but that's it. And I'm running Google Fi here, and that's using T-Mobile, and I'm only getting 3G. So I wouldn't recommend this in the US. I just wanted to get to try it out. This was launched in India, I think, with more the global variant that should have more bands for the US as well. So if you can import that one, that's launched under the Xiaomi Mi 10i label, but it's the exact same phone. It's just that it has more global bands, so that would be the version to get if you want to import it here to the US. And because it is the Chinese ROM, you get the usual Chinese ROM quirks if you're familiar with importing these phones, meaning that there's no Google services on it natively. I do have Google Play running on this, so I can try to fire that up. So I do have Google services in the Play Store running here, and I've got all my Android apps. The only 2 apps that I use that I couldn't install because they're not supported is Disney Plus and Netflix. This does have Widevine L1 DRM support, so it should play Netflix at full HD. I think I just have to find the APKs to try to sideload onto it. But other than that, it's just the usual Chinese ROM quirks and Google services, meaning that sometimes I get delayed notifications or some sync issues. But you can go into the notifications and actually force those apps and the aggressive memory or battery management not to shut those apps down. But you'll still have the occasional sync issue and the occasional delayed notification. That's normal with a lot of the Chinese ROMs if you're familiar with importing this. So that's just one of the quirks that come along with this phone. Now getting to the good part, which is battery and the cameras. So I've had this for just over 3 days and I've only had to charge this once. So I'm looking over and the official numbers are I've had this on the first charge for 1 day and 19 hours. So almost 2 complete days, and I had about 8 hours and 23 minutes of screen on time, and that was with a lot of camera use. So I was testing out the cameras and a lot of YouTube. So pretty heavy usage in that time. I got almost 2 full days and over 8 hours of screen on time. And so this has about a 4800 milliamp hour battery, I believe. And so even though it has an LCD display and not OLED, so OLED's more efficient in that manner if you're not familiar, and coupled with that 120 hertz display that's sucking down all that power, it still manages to have some really great battery life. So I think that's also because Xiaomi is really aggressive on the battery management in the background, but still you're going to get really great battery with this phone. I'm now on my 2nd day here, so I think I'm going to get another 2 full days out of this, and I expect about the same screen on time and active usage. So hopefully this only gets better over time, but I'll report on what the battery life looks like in my official review, which I usually do after about a month. Okay, so moving on to the cameras, this has that 108 megapixel camera for the main sensor. It's got an 8 megapixel ultra wide and 2 megapixel depth sensor and macro sensor. And as far as the macro sensor, I just would not recommend you use that. The pictures are going to come out really poor. If you want to take close-up macro photos, I suggest you just use that 108 megapixel main sensor and just zoom into 2 times. It'll snap into focus. You'll have a nice natural blurred background with that big sensor, and you're going to get something that's 100 times better than you're going to get from that macro camera. So just don't use the macro camera. It's just not going to produce any good results. The wide angle camera is actually pretty good, but I really want to talk about this 108 megapixel sensor because over the last year we've seen a lot of phones with these large megapixel sensors, and a lot of manufacturers, even Samsung and LG with the V60 and its 64 megapixel sensor, they all kind of struggled out of the gate, but they have made software improvements over time, and I think that's because that was really the first year where they all transitioned to these larger sensors. Traditionally, most camera sensors were 12 megapixels, and everyone had their software image processing tailored down to those sensors. Using these newer, larger sensors, I think people had to get their software image processing algorithms kind of tuned. And I think they're doing that. It's been improving. Samsung's improved. LG, I notice, has improved. Everyone's really improving there. But Xiaomi's really been pretty good out of the gate. Even their mid-level Mi Note 10 last year that had a 108 megapixel sensor, even that one was actually producing pretty good results. And they have a different 108 megapixel sensor in some of their higher end phones with some better glass that produce even better results. This one I wasn't really sure how it was going to be. I thought it was going to be okay being from Xiaomi. And actually in daytime, the shots come out pretty good. I'll just recommend that you always have HDR on. Without it, the colors are going to look pretty washed out. And I don't really like super saturated colors or anything like that. But just having HDR on brings them back to a more balanced color tone, and it's not going to look very washed out. So again, I suggest you always have HDR on when you're going to shoot with the main lens. This also has an AI mode, and like most AI modes on most phones, it's not very good. And this one is particularly bad. I would not suggest you ever turn on the AI mode. All it's going to do is really overly brighten the photo and over sharpen it, and it's not going to look very good. And as for the portrait mode, it's actually producing pretty good results, but like most phones, portrait modes in this price range, if you've got too much of a bright light behind your subject, it's going to completely blow out the background. So get a more balanced light, and the portrait shots actually come out pretty good. So I'm actually getting better than I thought results with this 108 megapixel camera outdoors. It's not going to be blow your socks off crazy, but it is a pretty good image that it will produce. Similar to the front-facing camera, I didn't think it was going to be all that great. Most front-facing cameras aren't very good, especially on phones at this price range, but this one actually was pretty good, and it produced pretty good results in both good light and some pretty decent results in even low light. And speaking of low light, the actual main 108 megapixel sensor did pretty well even in low light shots where I thought it would really struggle. There is one photo of a building that's in a pretty dark setting that most phones, even the Pixel, consistently can struggle with. And it actually produced a pretty good photo. The building was evenly lit. There's only lights at the top of that building, and those weren't overexposed. And most importantly, the night sky would remain dark. There was no blue or purple kind of hue in that sky. So surprisingly, it produced a really good image there. But it can also be hit or miss. So while it can produce those really impressive images, even in low light, it can produce some pretty bad images in low light, where the images are just over sharpened and completely washed out. So hopefully Xiaomi can update the software to be a little bit more consistent in both daylight and low light, because it can produce some really good results. And I did manage to take some video samples during the day. I forgot to do that at night. But during the day, the video actually comes out pretty good. And actually, stabilization at 1080p is really impressive. It's just at 4K that you're not going to get any stabilization at all. So it's going to look pretty shaky. So that's been my experience after using the Redmi Note 9 Pro 5G after about 3 days. If you have any other questions, leave them down below. If you want to see other camera samples, I post them to my social media accounts. So follow me there at Grant_likes on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, thanks for watching.